spoken topics. And I'm sure there must be some questions from the audience, so anyone has any question they want to direct to any one of the panelists here? Yes?
Yeah, what is a body alarm?
Sure, sorry. So a body alarm is when they make an announcement. We carry radios, and we were joking in the beginning about wearing the belt. So we wear a radio on our belt, and they'll announce it, and the entire institution will go off on all the overhead announcements and on our personal radios. There's a body alarm on 5 South, there's a body alarm in psychology, and everyone will go running, meaning all staff members that are available in the area will go running to that alarm. So even though I'm trained as a psychologist, I carry OC, which is very similar to MACE, but a little bit stronger, and I respond to things just like an officer would. I go to the same training. I shot all the firearms just like an officer would, handgun, a rifle, a shotgun, and we're trained in the same exact ways that, if there's an issue going on in the institution, we're there to respond, and it's called a body alarm, and you know that if that happens in the institution, you would obviously want somebody running for you, so you are booking it. MCC New York is a little bit different. We have elevators, so you're booking it to the elevator, and then you're not moving until the elevator comes. But when you're on a campus, like I mentioned, FCC Butner, which is in North Carolina, that's huge. It's like a college campus. So you are like running across the rec yard to go potentially save a colleague who might be assaulted by an inmate or in need of support.
Just to follow up on something you said too, why are there not more treating psychologists there? The situation with Mr. B is like crying out when he gets a suicide attempt number 3 in the day. It should never get there. It should be stopped after the first one. Why don't they have a better balance of treating people with just forensic people?
The situation with Mr. B actually was extremely rare. I've never had a case like that. How he had that razor with him on suicide watch, these guys can be pretty savvy in taking in contraband or, harming themselves in a way that you wouldn't even think that there was anything in the cell for them to hurt themselves with. We have a department of 7 psychologists. Even with that and all of us responding, there's still issues that come up. This individual was on suicide watch in a locked cell with an inmate companion observing him, and this still happened. So, if somebody is going to harm themselves and they are that adamant about it, they're going to do it. And we respond accordingly, but for sure, there can always be more treatment. There can always be more psychologists in the area, and I think that, it's the federal government. We have a certain budget that they fill. And when you compare that with the state system, like I mentioned in UMass, there's a whole host of psychologists. They have a forensic team, and then they have psychologists that work on the unit. So it's different. That's a private sector, a private hospital. We're at a federal institution, so there are going to be differences in treatment.
Other questions for any of the panelists? Yes.
Just a clarification. So you say you have both kinds of psychologists, those who treat the inmates and those who evaluate them? Because I also head of a labor union. I represent psychologists who do work at either Rikers Island or also at different lockups, and one of their jobs is to pick out those who are suicidal and pull them out of the general population, put them someplace else. I've had a member who actually missed one, and she got fired because the person did hang themselves, but she didn't pick it up in advance, so they said she did a bad evaluation. But you have both, and your team does the one of the pre-trial assessments.
Right, so we have a team. We have a chief psychologist. We have 2 staff psychologists. I think you actually know one, Darlene Emery.
She was my student.
Right, I was actually mentioning to her that I might see you this evening, so she said to say hi. So 2 staff psychologists, 3 forensic psychologists, and then we have a drug abuse treatment coordinator that runs all the substance abuse treatment groups with a drug treatment specialist who has a master's in substance abuse counseling. So, with that whole team, we each have our own role, but of course we all respond if there's a situation like that on hand.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Denise. I have some more questions for you. So first off, you said that you make 3 attempts. Can you tell me about how often you go to make those attempts? Like once a day, once a week? Does it depend on the person?
So what I meant by that is when I have an individual that's declining to participate in the forensic evaluation, I'll make 3 serious attempts by having them call down to my office, and if they refuse to come to my office, I'm going up to them. I'm going up to the unit to try to pull them out. And if they refuse to come in the multi-purpose area on the unit, I'm gonna go down to their cell. So I am very active, and I do try my very best to get them to participate. But like I said, just like with medication, we can't force someone to speak to us. That's their choice if they want to participate in the forensic evaluation or not. And I tell them that flat out, listen, this is a court-ordered forensic evaluation. This will be completed whether you speak to me or not. And it would be within their best interest if they would like something that they're saying, their self-report, to be included in the report. Otherwise, all I have to go by are prior mental health records, collateral contacts with family, loved ones, and then any discovery information, as well as my collateral contacts with the AUSA, the Assistant United States Attorney, also known as the prosecutor, and the defense attorney. So they're made aware of that, and that's up to them at that point to make that choice, and that's perfectly fine. And I just indicate that it's a much more, much briefer report because their account is not going to be in the evaluation write-up. But they're very well aware of that.
Okay, if I could clarify, so you go, they refuse to see you altogether outright. Do you wait until the next day? Do you wait a couple of days before you try to make another attempt?
It depends. I mean, it's a federal prison. Things come up all the time. We have institutional lockdowns. We have body alarms like I was just discussing. I wish I could say I have a perfect schedule and I know everything that I'm going, sure, I have a plan, but that's something we really have to be flexible with. I typically will wait, I would say at least 3 business days, because I want to let them, if they're going through something, they're just having a tough time, maybe they just got there, maybe they got bad news, something going on in their family, I have to take that all into account. Plus I have 30 days, so why rush it, right? So I'll let them know, listen, I'll try following up with you maybe later in the week, or I might say I'll try following up with you next week. I might try different tactics. How would you feel about participating in testing, but maybe not speaking to me for formal interviews? I even try to just rapport build with them, talk about, hey, how's it going on the unit? What's going on with the other inmates? How are you spending your days? You're going to recreation? If it's to the point where they're that adamant that they don't want to participate, they won't even answer questions like that. They actually won't even come and see me. So it's really a case-by-case basis, but for sure I make as many attempts as needed, and usually 3 is my cutoff. 3 meaning that I've made, very serious attempts to get them to speak to me.
I'm going to go to Mr. Zgovich for a second. 2 questions. What about false confession experts? Do you see the courts are allowing them to actually testify more often at this point in time? And are they being effective in affecting the verdicts one way or another?
Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some states allow it, some states some states don't. In terms of making an impact, I mean, definitely the Kogut case, the John Kogut case on Long Island, where the 3 co-defendants, they were excluded by DNA testing. This was a rape murder case, and the prosecutor decided to retry in light of, even despite the DNA test, and the false confession expert was allowed there, and I think it made a clear-cut difference in that case.
Do you know of any studies where when they've allowed the experts, the acquittal rate is higher or lower?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I'm not aware of the stats on that, but I'm definitely want to look into it now that you suggested that.
And obviously DNA is a major factor in terms of the
Yes.
Innocent Project.
Yes.
We hear all through the news, obviously in the last couple of weeks, familiar DNA testing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that at
Yes.
all?
Yes, I am.
And do you think that's a good thing, bad thing, effective, et
Yeah,
cetera?
I think that's a good thing. I mean, there was at least 1 case that I was aware that sticks out in my head, but there's more. It's just the stuff that I'm aware of. But there was like a familial DNA testing, and ironically, somebody who was not even born at the time that a murder happened, wound up committing a crime, and so they had his DNA, and so they ran DNA from an unsolved crime, and it was determined it's not you, but it's somebody related to you, and that served as a jump off point for investigation, and the actual perpetrator was caught. So I think it's a good thing because it's an investigative tool, and to the extent that the right people are getting caught and convicted, that's one more case in which the innocent person is not being wrongfully convicted.
Is the effectiveness rate, I mean, obviously we all hear the stats that DNA evidence is 99.99%
Mhm.
correct.
Right.
Does familiar DNA testing, are the numbers much lower? Is that gonna impact whether it's gonna be accepted by the courts or not, if you know?
Yeah, I don't know what the stat is, but again, I just want to point out though, if it's been determined that the perpetrator is related to a person, because we're talking familial, that's not going to be used as evidence in and of itself. That's going to cause investigation and then for there to get some direct evidence. Often they'll try to get law enforcement try to get a DNA sample from an actual suspect.
Right, and obviously it's a terrible jogger case in Brooklyn, and the problem is when an investigation leads go cold, literally there's thousands, if not millions, of possible suspects. Familiar DNA gives you a way to start getting back on a track at least, to narrow the focus so you can hopefully do a proper investigation to get who was ever going.
But
Yes.
what is there is a controversy about this, from what I understand. What's the basic?
Yeah, it's a privacy argument. It's a privacy argument.
Right, in terms of just, you're going one step beyond the person who's actually the suspect, what that could lead to. It's like opening a Pandora's box. It sounds good, if it helps solve crimes that are mysteries, that's a good thing, but what is it gonna do in terms of people's privacy? How is it gonna affect, and how are the police gonna use it? Since it's brand new, no one kinda knows where you're gonna go with it at this point in time. Yes?
Yeah, I can't cite the statistics, but a cousin of mine was supervising as an attorney in the Innocence Project and did mention to me that although they do look at the DNA very carefully and everything, when you go into the cases, there were a lot of legal errors, and that's what she was pointing out, and then they had the DNA to corroborate. I don't know what level of sophistication, where you are in your programs or whatever, but there were two things along the way that I just wanted to mention, having been chief psychologist at a city facility that was a prison ward, many memories. And there were two things I wanted to mention that my beginning students or externs or interns were kind of surprised at. One was, of course, what you mentioned about the narrower definition of competency to stand trial. You can be crazy as hell and you can still be competent to stand trial because you can participate in your own defense. So the narrowness of that is one thing. And the other is when you talked about protecting yourself and others who are on staff, professionals, from people who might be violent. One thing that I told my interns pretty much early on is don't sit behind the desk. You sit with your back to the door so you can run out if you have to. I hope that saves some of you from being hit or attacked.
I hope that
You
doesn't
mean that-
discourage some of you from It's the same concept sitting in certain restaurants and steakhouses with mobsters, but we won't get into that.
And I mean, you may have already known this, so I apologize if you are beyond that point, but I just wanted to mention it.
I have another
Yes.
question for Dr. Demisa. When you do your evaluation, do you have to testify in court during a trial, perhaps, of a case? And the second part of the question is, do you have to testify on a U course exam? What happens? How have you been challenged with your assessment?
Sure. So, not on every case, but they can call us to testify. I had a few where I was right at the point where I'm about to testify, and it was televideo. They were working with me on that. Rather than commuting, they tried to save on cost. And it did not go through. So in the 3 years I've been there, I actually have not yet testified on a case that I've written up. Prior to that, though, I testified like 25 times through my internship, postdoc experiences. So, cross-examination is always difficult. You need to go into it knowing that you're not going to personalize that. You're there to express your opinions in an unbiased way, and whether that is for or against the defendant, again, is not my interest. Right. And there's oftentimes individuals that are having a very different opinion, and that's okay. Again, as I mentioned before, us as forensic psychologists, we make opinions. We don't make the decisions. That's what the judge is for. So that's the very nature of being in a courtroom, and all of this evidence is presented, and it's your task as a forensic psychologist to present your opinion, and leave it up to the fact finder or the judge to make the ultimate and final decision on either whether the individual is competent or not, responsible or not.
And having conducted many cross-examinations, it's very, very important that the expert fully go over all the material and be prepared for what's going on, and also to evaluate all the information at their disposal. I just finished a trial like a month ago. It wasn't on this type of issue, but the expert, basically, all they did was take the information they got from one side. There was all sorts of written information that gave a full picture of what was going on, and the expert didn't evaluate or read any of that. So on my cross-examination, I basically made his whole expert testimony, which was critical to the one side, irrelevant, because I said, you're only basing it on what one person told you. You don't have a full picture, and I went through all the other pieces of things that he could have evaluated. So it doesn't mean that he was wrong in his opinion, but the fact that they didn't do a thorough job of preparing themselves for not only the case, but for cross-examination, rendered an expert no value in that case. So it's important that everyone prepare. Any other questions for any of our panelists? Yes.
After you were exonerated, was there any kind of psychological support, knowing, you know, what you've gone through as you were re-entering into society?
Well, there wasn't, in the sense that there was nothing provided to me by the state.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
That's what
but,
I'm asking.
you know, there was private setting, you know, clinicians that I worked with. There was like an emergency fund that the Innocence Project had, and so FEGS, actually here in Manhattan on Spring Street, so the chief psychologist there was able to get the institution to agree to treat me at a significantly discounted rate.
Okay.
Yeah, then I found a different, later on, a different expert. I did some EMDR treatment because I found that the psychotherapy was only partially effective with regards to the typical symptoms. And since we're here in a psychological setting, I'll reference them. And these are very typical in terms of the impact of being wrongfully imprisoned. So firstly, the only thing that the experts can liken it to, a similar experience, would be like a soldier coming back from a war setting. The typical after effects would include post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, anxiety, feeling of processing things at a slower speed than the rest of society. There's a feeling of having been frozen in time, so there's a disconnect. You may, like I was 32, for example, but internally, I would say emotionally, psychologically, you know, I felt like really I was 17 years old, because that was the age that I was last free in the society. Definitely, fear on seeing law enforcement was another aspect to it. Certainly, I had a altered personality, and then just being overwhelmed generally by the amount of external stimuli in the world relative to the reduced stimuli and reduced amount of decisions that one would make in prison. I mean, for me, just even getting junk mail sent to me, like I have to check that every day and go through, and, you know, being worried, is there something there I'm going to miss? I mean, that was rattling to me as compared to mail being just handed to me. You know, yeah. So there wasn't anything provided, I guess, as a short answer. But what I was able to receive some private sector treatment, and I did the EMDR as the second part of the training, which at the time was controversial practice. I'm not really sure what the state of it is now, how it's regarded. Maybe you'll chime in when I'm done for it, but you don't want to come in now. But I found it effective personally, okay, so it benefited me. So I would say, and that psychologist, by the way, he was willing to work like on a lien basis. So the litigation that I was pursuing, he was willing to take a chance on, you know, that he would get paid in the end, you know, if I was successful. But I mean, the chances of that were pretty high, and he got a nice little goose egg at the end. So to try to encourage people to think about that, and certainly we need to have more psychologists be willing to assist exonerees on reintegrating back into society to deal with those after effects. I would urge people to consider doing some of that pro bono, or maybe maybe doing something on contingency if you're operating a state in which there is compensation, which most, some of them, there are not. So the last thing I'll say is if it was a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of severity of symptoms, maybe it was like a 15 to begin with. So, after going maybe like 4 hours a week, for many years, I wasn't the finished product that you're seeing now. So to go maybe from 15 to maybe 3.5, I consider to be considerable success. But no one escapes totally unscathed, no matter what.
I know you've obviously spoken before to classes, and that you have a foundation. Do you just want to tell a little bit to the students about that foundation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so when I was compensated and I pursued litigation in the state court and also in federal court, so I was successful, and from the funds that I received, I decided that I wanted to contribute a significant amount to start a nonprofit entity that exonerates other people who are still wrongfully in prison. I wanted to reach back, and by the way, that was a big part of the healing process, just being an individual advocate from the decision to trade privacy for awareness and to speak and to lobby, and all of that was therapeutic. It was cathartic. That was part of it. I mean, hearing the empathetic ear of people, and I felt like I was making a difference. And I kind of, in a kaleidoscopic fashion, I felt like, that was my silver lining. This is what I'm here in the world to do. So that kind of made things easier for me psychologically. But I was that person, that individual advocate for maybe 5 years. When I received some compensation, I wanted to go to the next level, which I could never do as an individual advocate. So I wanted to have a staff and exonerate people. I was tired of doing things on the peripheral, on the public relational level. So I made that commitment. I put 7 figures in. Let's just leave it at that. But we were in our 4.5 years of existence, so we were able to win 2 exonerations. So William Lopez from Brooklyn, who was in for 23.5 years, we were able to exonerate him in collaboration with his pre-existing counsel. And then maybe about 7 months ago, we won exoneration in the William Hawley case. That was he was in for 8 years and 4 months. That was an arson case in which it was actually an electrical fire, and the person who helped put the fire out was wrongfully convicted of it because the fact that he led a group. They went to 2 areas where they thought, looking for where the fire is in a bar, and on the third try, third place they tried, they guessed that's where the fire started at, and that was taken as evidence that he knew where the fire, where it started at. So I mean, to get the 2 people out like that was very meaningful. Certainly a continuation of the awareness and policy making, and no question about it, having the nonprofit and support staff and volunteers has definitely opened up a lot more doors than if I didn't have it. So there is the indirect spillover. Lastly, we were able to get 3 other people out, not through exoneration, because you could be convinced that it could be clear someone's innocent from the pre-existing record. That's what you evaluate, but you can't relitigate what's already been litigated. You have to come up with something new, something you have to either prove actual innocence by a clear and convincing standard, or you can argue newly discovered evidence, where the burden is you have to show that the verdict would probably have been different. But that all presupposes you can come up with evidence to prove a negative, which is very hard to do. So in the case of 3 of our clients, we hadn't been able to come up with anything new. It was fairly clear that this was an injustice. It had a lot of red flags in it, and so we sent letters to the parole board outlining the primary and secondary reasons why we thought the person was innocent, and we were 3 for 5 on that. So the parole board went with our letter and paroled 3 people. So 5 people that are out through the foundation.
One thing that's obviously a common theme from all our panelists is, as well as Dr. Takushi and hopefully myself, is that you have to have a passion for what you're doing, and you have to have a commitment to what you're doing. You're going to be facing some difficult situations and some obstacles, but having that passion and commitment is what makes it not only be able to get through the hard times, but for you to end up having really a rewarding, I don't want to say career, but a rewarding life that you feel you've made a difference on something.
Does the other panelists was going to weigh in on the EMDR piece?
Absolutely.
No, it's a simple. First of all, could you explain what that is?
Yeah, it's eye movement desensitization. So there's a light. There's a psychologist. He's the experts there, and it's a light. And it's on like a tripod type thing. And so initially, before getting the light moving, the expert, they ask you to recount an event in which your reaction was disproportionate to what actually happened. So then he writes that down, and then he makes you think back. What is it in your past that resembles that? Because what's really going on there psychologically is you're responding to a past traumatic event that the memory of which has been triggered, just usually subconsciously. So you trace everything back to there's nothing else left, and then you work backwards and you recall the incident. As you recall the incident, the emotions come up, and then the light starts moving back and forth. You're not supposed to move your head. Your eyes move back and forth, and he records a number down. Well, how severe is your or how intense is your feeling, and you go all the way to 0 on each till you clear it. So the end result of it, is that you'll still have the memories, but the emotion of it is gone. So if something similar happens, you won't have the same internal reaction, and therefore you don't act out in the same fashion.
And by the way, the finding is that it's very effective. This is an example, but they don't know why. It's an interesting. They cannot explain. I mean, we can come up with an explanation, of course, but in terms of where the science is at right now is the recognition that it has worked, continue to have a good effect, but they cannot quite distinguish the mechanism that is involved in that doing better.
It might be related to hypnosis
It
and
has
to
to be.
desensitization,
Yes.
also cognitive behavior therapy.
All of that has been, but in terms of the actual mechanism,
right.
that hasn't. That's a question.
It's speculative.
Actually, it's a form of psychotherapy. That's what I'm hearing.
In a sense, it's the fact that you are asked to sort of engage and recollect that which was traumatic for you. The more you do that, the more you sort of take control over the experience. So you can, we can come up with an explanation as to what is, but the mechanism is the one that is not told. Yes, it's a form of psychotherapy. In fact, in one of some of the treatment intervention for trauma related had to do with similar approach in terms of writing, being an effective way of trying to take control over the experience. It's related mechanism, but again,
It's a good dissertation topic.
yeah, I'm looking for one.
Well, again, I think that we've hit 8:40. I hope you found this all interesting. We really appreciate not only the students being here, but our visitors from other schools. And have a good night and have a good weekend.
Hopefully,
And
there's
one second
panelists-
first, 1 second for the panel.
Hopefully, they could remain. You could ask them about the externships, about the foundation, about the forensic division. But meanwhile, we want to thank them for participating and present them with a certificate of recognition for sharing their expertise with us today. Dr. Denisa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again, if you have any questions individually, you can come up and talk. Those who don't want to,
Yes,
have a
I
very
was
good
really
week.
far from
And,
home.
Those